The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue was nearly empty when Julia Owens first saw the man standing across the street, staring directly at her through the window. And something cold slithered down her spine because his eyes never blinked. She looked away quickly, pretending she had not noticed, and returned to wiping down the counter at Morrison Gallery, where she worked as an assistant curator. The gallery occupied the ground floor of a historic building in downtown Seattle, its tall windows displaying rotating exhibits of contemporary art. Julia loved her job, loved the quiet moments between visitors when she could study the paintings and sculptures, loved the smell of old wood and fresh paint that permeated the space. But lately, those quiet moments had become tense. It started 3 weeks ago. She had been leaving work around 7 in the evening, walking the 2 blocks to her car parked in the public lot on Stewart Street. The first time she noticed him, he was standing near the entrance of the lot, smoking a cigarette. She thought nothing of it. The second time, 2 days later, he was there again. Same spot, same cigarette, same intense stare that made her grip her keys tighter. By the 5th occurrence, Julia knew with absolute certainty that this was not coincidence. She described him to her roommate Sarah as average-looking, maybe late 30s, brown hair, medium build, always wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing particularly threatening about his appearance, but everything threatening about his presence. Sarah had immediately told her to call the police, but what would Julia say? A man stood in a public parking lot. He had not approached her, had not spoken to her, had not technically done anything illegal. Still, the fear nested in her stomach like a stone. Tonight, as Julia locked up the gallery at 6:30, her hands trembled slightly. Her boss, Patricia, had left early for a dentist appointment, leaving Julia to close alone. She set the alarm, pulled her coat tight against the October chill, and began the walk to her car. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. She walked quickly, her boots clicking against concrete, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The parking lot appeared ahead, and her heart began to hammer. She scanned the area, looking for that familiar figure. He was not at the entrance. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by suspicion. Where was he? She reached her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and fumbled with her keys. The lot was not empty but quiet, just a few other vehicles scattered across the asphalt. She unlocked the door and slid inside, immediately hitting the lock button. As she started the engine, movement caught her eye in the rearview mirror. There, behind a concrete pillar about 20 feet back. The man stepped partially into view, and even in the dim light, she could see he was watching her. Julia threw the car into reverse, backed out faster than she should have, and drove home, taking a deliberately complicated route, checking her mirrors obsessively. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, exhausted and frightened, Julia made a decision. She would tell Patricia everything and ask to adjust her schedule, so she never closed alone. But when she arrived at the gallery at 9, she found Patricia in the back office with another person, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit. "Julia, perfect timing," Patricia said, her face bright with excitement. "This is Blake Harrison. He is the new owner of the building. The sale finalized yesterday." Blake Harrison turned, and Julia found herself looking up at a man who seemed to command the space around him simply by existing. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair pushed back from a strong, angular face, sharp blue eyes that assessed her quickly but not unkindly, and the kind of posture that suggested he was used to being in charge. Everything about him, from his perfectly tailored suit to his confident handshake, spoke of wealth and authority. "Miss Owens," he said, his voice deep and measured. Patricia tells me you have been instrumental in curating the last several exhibits. I assist, Julia said, suddenly very aware of her plain black dress and cardigan, her hair pulled into a simple ponytail. Patricia does the real work. Do not sell yourself short, Patricia interjected. Julia has an exceptional eye. Blake nodded slowly, still holding Julia's gaze. I am planning some renovations to the building, but I wanted to meet the tenants first, understand how the spaces are used. Would you mind showing me around the gallery? Of course, Julia said, though her mind was still half focused on the problem of her stalker. Patricia excused herself to make phone calls, leaving Julia to guide Blake through the gallery. He asked intelligent questions about the art, about foot traffic, about the lighting and layout. He moved through the space with careful attention, occasionally pausing to study a particular piece. Despite her distraction, Julia found herself impressed by his genuine interest. You seem tired, Blake said suddenly as they stood before a large abstract painting near the back of the gallery. Julia blinked, caught off guard by the observation. I have not been sleeping well. Problems. His tone was casual, but something in his expression suggested real concern. She hesitated. This man was essentially her new landlord, a stranger, someone clearly important and busy. Why would he care about her problems? But there was something steady about him, something that made her want to trust him. There is a man, she began slowly. He has been following me. Not exactly following, but he is always there when I leave work, at the parking lot, just watching. Blake's entire demeanor changed. The casual interest vanished, replaced by something harder, more focused. How long has this been happening? 3 weeks. Almost every night. Have you contacted the police? He has not actually done anything. He just stands there. Blake's jaw tightened. That is stalking, Miss Owens. That is absolutely something. I know, I do not know what to do. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, What time do you usually leave? 6:37. And you walk to the Stewart Street lot? Yes. Blake pulled his phone from his pocket, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. I have some meetings this afternoon, but I will be back here by 6. I will walk you to your car. Julia stared at him. You do not have to do that. I know I do not have to, but I am going to. Really, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. His tone left no room for argument. 6 o'clock. I will meet you here. Before Julia could protest further, Blake's phone rang. He answered it, his voice shifting into business mode as he strode toward the front of the gallery. He gave her a brief nod before leaving, the door chiming softly behind him. Patricia returned from the back office, practically vibrating with curiosity. So, what did you think? He seems nice, Julia said carefully. Nice? Julia, that man is Blake Harrison. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city. There was an article about him in Seattle Business Monthly last year. Self-made millionaire, started buying properties at 25. Now he has a portfolio worth over $50 million. Julia felt her eyebrows rise. Oh. And he is single, Patricia added with a meaningful look. Very single. Also very private. Rarely does interviews, keeps to himself. But apparently he is a good landlord, fair, takes care of his properties. Julia thought about the way Blake had reacted when she told him about the stalker, the immediate concern, the decisive action. He offered to walk me to my car tonight. Patricia's eyes widened. He what? I told him about the man who has been watching me, and he just offered. Julia, men like Blake Harrison do not walk their tenants to their cars. Maybe he is just being nice. Or maybe he is interested. Julia shook her head. A man like that, interested in me. Patricia, be serious. You are beautiful, smart, and kind. Why would he not be interested? Because we live in completely different worlds. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but a customer entered the gallery and the conversation ended. Still, throughout the day, Julia found herself thinking about Blake Harrison. About the way he had looked at her, really looked at her, as if she mattered. About the quiet authority in his voice when he insisted on walking her to her car. About the fact that he was apparently one of the wealthiest men in Seattle, and yet he had spent an hour touring a small art gallery, asking questions, paying attention. At 6 o'clock exactly, the gallery door opened and Blake walked in. He had loosened his tie slightly, and there was a hint of 5 o'clock shadow along his jaw, but otherwise he looked as composed as he had that morning. "Ready?" he asked. Julia grabbed her coat and purse, called goodbye to Patricia, who was watching the whole scene with barely concealed delight, and stepped outside with Blake. The evening was cold and crisp, the sky already dark. They began walking toward the parking lot, and Julia was acutely aware of Blake beside her, tall and solid and somehow reassuring. "Tell me about the man," Blake said as they walked. "Details." Julia described him as best she could. The brown hair, the dark jacket, the way he always positioned himself near the parking lot entrance or sometimes deeper in the lot. Blake listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively more serious. As they approached the lot, Blake's pace slowed slightly. His eyes scanned the area methodically, taking in every shadow, every vehicle, every possible hiding spot. Julia tried to do the same, but her heart was beating too fast, and her nerves made everything seem threatening. "There," she whispered, grabbing Blake's arm without thinking. "By the blue van." Blake followed her gaze. Sure enough, the man was there, partially obscured but definitely watching. Blake's hand covered Julia's where it gripped his arm, warm and steady. "Walk to your car normally," Blake said quietly. "I am right here." They continued forward, and Julia forced her legs to move at a normal pace. The man shifted as they passed, his attention clearly fixed on them, or more specifically, on Julia, but he made no move to approach. Blake stayed close to Julia's side, his presence protective without being overbearing. When they reached her car, Blake positioned himself between her and where the man stood. "Get in," Blake said. "Lock the doors." Julia did as he said, her hands shaking as she started the engine. Blake remained standing beside her car, his posture relaxed but alert. The man by the van had stepped fully into view now, and for a long moment, the two men simply stared at each other. Julia could not hear what was said, but she saw Blake pull something from his pocket, his phone probably, and make a show of it. The message was clear. "I see you. I know you are here, and I am taking note." The man turned abruptly and walked away, disappearing between two rows of cars. Blake watched until he was out of sight, then turned back to Julia and motioned for her to lower her window. "I got a partial plate number from the van," Blake said. "I am going to have someone look into it. You do not have to do that, Julia." The way he said her name, firm but gentle, stopped her protest. "This is serious. Let me help." She nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. "Thank you. Drive safe. Text me when you get home so I know you made it." He paused. "Actually, I do not have your number." Julia rattled off her number and Blake entered it into his phone immediately. "I will see you tomorrow," he said. "Same time. Blake, you cannot walk me to my car every night. Watch me." He stepped back and Julia pulled out of the parking space, her mind reeling. In her rearview mirror, she could see Blake standing there, watching to make sure she left safely. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in her chest. True to his word, Blake was at the gallery the next evening at 6. And the evening after that. And the one after that. It became a routine. He would arrive, sometimes in a suit, sometimes in more casual slacks and a sweater, and they would walk together to the parking lot. The stalker appeared twice more that first week, always keeping his distance but always present. Each time, Blake's demeanor turned cold and protective, his body angling between Julia and the threat. But on the nights when the stalker did not show, the walks became something else. They talked. Blake asked about her work, her background, her dreams. Julia learned that Blake had grown up in a small town in Oregon, that he had worked construction jobs to put himself through college, that he had started his real estate business with a single run-down apartment building he renovated himself. He spoke about his properties the way Julia spoke about art, with passion and careful attention to detail. "Why real estate?" Julia asked one evening as they walked slowly, both of them unconsciously taking the long route to her car. "Permanence," Blake said. "I like building something that lasts. A good building can outlive you, can be home to hundreds of people over decades. There is something meaningful in that." "That is a beautiful way to look at it," he glanced at her. "Most people think I am just in it for the money." "Are you?" "No." He said it simply, matter-of-factly. "The money is nice, but it is not why I do it." Julia found herself opening up to him in ways she rarely did with people she had known for years. She told him about growing up in Tacoma, about her parents who ran a small bookstore, about her younger brother studying marine biology in California. She told him about the first time she saw a Rothko painting and how it made her cry, about her dream of someday curating a major exhibit at a real museum. "Why not here?" Blake asked. "Morrison Gallery is small but respected." "It is Patricia's gallery, not mine. I am just an assistant." "So start your own," Julia laughed. "Right, with what money? There are grants, investors, loans. If you have a solid business plan, Blake, that is sweet, but it is not realistic for someone like me." "Someone like you, Julia, you are one of the smartest people I have met. Why not you?" She did not have an answer for that. 2 weeks into their nightly walks, Blake's investigator found information on the van and its owner. The man's name was Derek Paulson, a 42-year-old with a history of harassment charges. He had no direct connection to Julia that anyone could find, which somehow made it worse. Blake had already filed a police report and provided the information, but the officers said unless Derek made a direct threat or approached Julia, there was little they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. "That is not good enough," Blake said when he told Julia this. They were sitting in his car in the parking lot, having abandoned the pretense that he was just walking her to hers. "I want you to park in my building's private garage. It is secure, requires a key card for access." "Blake, I cannot." "Yes, you can. I own the building. I can give access to whoever I want. Consider it a perk of being a tenant. The gallery does not pay rent directly to you. We pay the management company." "Semantics." Blake pulled a key card from his pocket and handed it to her. "The garage entrance is on Pine Street. There are visitor spots near the elevator. Park there." Julia took the card, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent a small jolt through her. "Why are you doing all this?" Blake was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "Because you deserve to feel safe." "But you do not even know me." "Not really." "I know enough." "What does that mean?" "It means I know you are kind to every person who walks into that gallery, even the difficult ones. I know you stay late to finish work even though you do not get paid overtime. I know you remember the names of the homeless people on your block and you buy extra coffee to give them. I know you light up when you talk about art, and I know you have nightmares about that man because I can see it in your eyes some mornings. I know enough, Julia." She stared at him, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "I did not realize you paid such close attention." "I pay attention to things that matter." The air in the car felt suddenly charged, heavy with unspoken things. Julia knew she should get out, should go home. should not let this thing between them become whatever it was trying to become. Blake Harrison was her landlord, technically, and a millionaire, and so far out of her league, they were not even playing the same sport. But when she looked at him, all she could think about was how safe she felt when he was near, how he made her laugh, how he listened when she talked as if her words were important. "I should go," she said finally. "Yeah," Blake's voice was rough. "You should." Neither of them moved. Then Blake's phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it with a clipped Harrison, and his expression shifted into business mode. Julia took the opportunity to slip out of his car and into hers. As she drove to the new garage on Pine Street, she tried to convince herself that whatever she was feeling was just gratitude, just relief at having someone help her through a scary situation. But when she lay in bed that night, it was Blake's face she saw, Blake's voice she heard, Blake's words that echoed in her mind. "I pay attention to things that matter." The private garage made an enormous difference. Julia felt safer immediately, and the added benefit was that Blake met her there instead of walking from the gallery. Often, they would sit in one of their cars for 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, just talking. Julia looked forward to those conversations with an intensity that probably should have worried her. 3 weeks after they started using the garage, Julia invited Blake to the gallery's opening night for a new exhibit featuring local emerging artists. It was a Friday evening, the gallery filled with wine-drinking art enthusiasts, and Julia had spent days helping Patricia prepare. She wore a dark green dress she borrowed from Sarah, her hair down and curled slightly, and she felt pretty in a way she rarely did. Blake arrived 30 minutes after the event started, and when he walked through the door, Julia's breath caught. He wore a black suit with a dark blue tie that matched his eyes, and he looked so devastatingly handsome that several people turned to stare. His gaze swept the room and found Julia immediately, and the smile that crossed his face was warm and genuine. He made his way to her through the crowd, and Julia was aware of the whispers starting up around them. People recognized him. Patricia appeared at Julia's elbow, her expression somewhere between smug and delighted. "Blake," Patricia said warmly, "thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." Blake shook Patricia's hand, but his attention stayed on Julia. "You look beautiful." Julia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. Let me show you the exhibit." They moved through the gallery together, Julia explaining each piece, the artist's background, the techniques used. Blake listened attentively, asked questions, and several times Julia caught him watching her instead of the art. The awareness between them was palpable, and Julia knew other people could sense it too. She saw the speculative looks, heard the whispered conversations. "You are causing a stir," Julia said quietly when they paused near a sculpture in the corner. "Am I? Everyone knows who you are." "I do not care what everyone thinks." Blake stepped slightly closer. "Julia, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "Okay. I did not come tonight because of the art. I mean, the art is great, but that is not why I am here. No, I am here because you are here. Because I have been looking for an excuse to see you outside of parking garages and worried walks to cars." Blake paused, his expression serious. "I like you. More than I should, probably. More than is sensible, given that I am technically your landlord and we met under less than ideal circumstances. But I like you, Julia, and I think you might like me too, and I would very much like to take you to dinner. A real date, if you are interested." Julia's mind spun. Yes, she wanted to say. Yes, absolutely, without question. But doubt crept in, all the reasons this was complicated, all the ways it could go wrong. "Blake, I do not know if that is a good idea." "Why not?" "Because you are you and I am me, and those are very different things." "I do not see it that way. You own buildings worth millions of dollars." I can barely afford my half of the rent. Blake's expression hardened slightly. Is that what you think matters to me? Money? No, I just mean, Julia, I have money. I worked hard for it and I am grateful for it, but it is not who I am. And it is definitely not what I look for in another person. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. I like you because you are smart and passionate and kind. I like that you see beauty in things other people overlook. I like the way you scrunch your nose when you are thinking hard about something. I like talking to you more than I have liked talking to anyone in years. That has nothing to do with money or status or any of the other things you think separate us. But one dinner, that is all I am asking. If it is terrible, if you hate it, we will go back to being friendly landlord and tenant. But give us a chance. Julia looked up at him, at the hope and uncertainty in his eyes, and she realized that Blake Harrison, for all his money and success, was just as nervous as she was. The thought made her smile. Okay, one dinner. The smile that broke across Blake's face was worth every bit of her anxiety. Saturday night, I will pick you up at 7. Saturday night, Julia agreed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Blake stayed for another hour, charming Patricia and several artists, buying 2 paintings, and never straying far from Julia's side. When he left, he squeezed her hand and said, "Text me your address." Julia floated through the rest of the night. Sarah was waiting up when she got home, demanding details, squealing when Julia told her about the date. I told you he was interested. A millionaire, Julia, a gorgeous millionaire. It is just dinner. It is never just dinner. Saturday arrived both too quickly and not quickly enough. Julia changed outfits 6 times before settling on a simple black dress and heels, her hair loose around her shoulders. Blake picked her up exactly at 7 in a sleek black car that probably cost more than Julia made in 2 years. He wore dark jeans and a gray button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he looked so good it almost hurt to look at him. "Hi," Julia said as she slid into the passenger seat. "Hi." Blake leaned over and kissed her cheek, the gesture sweet and tentative. "You look incredible." He took her to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with only 10 tables and food that tasted like someone's grandmother made it. They sat in a corner booth, candles flickering between them, and talked for 3 hours. Blake told her about his worst real estate deal, a building that turned out to have structural damage he did not catch in the inspection, costing him hundreds of thousands to fix. Julia told him about the time she accidentally knocked over a sculpture during an exhibit installation and spent the next 2 weeks convinced she would be fired. "Were you?" Blake asked, grinning. "No. Patricia was actually really nice about it." The sculpture belonged to the artist's experimental phase, and she said he would probably be relieved to have an excuse to let it go. Blake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I would have paid to see your face when it fell. I think I aged 5 years in 5 seconds." The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that did not feel awkward. Blake reached across the table at one point and took Julia's hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. The gesture felt natural, right, as if they had been doing this for years instead of hours. After dinner, Blake drove them to Cary Park, the overlook providing a stunning view of the Seattle skyline. They stood at the railing, the city spread out before them like a carpet of lights, and Blake wrapped his arm around Julia's shoulders to ward off the cold. "I have a confession," Blake said quietly. "What?" "The first time I saw you, before I even bought the building, I thought you were the most interesting person I had ever seen." Julia turned to look at him. "You saw me before we officially met." "I toured the building 2 weeks before closing the deal. You were in the gallery arranging flowers in a vase near the window. You were completely absorbed in getting them just right, turning the vase, adjusting individual stems. I watched you for 5 minutes before you even noticed I was there. And when you looked up and smiled at me, I forgot why I was there. Why did you not say anything? Because I was there on business and it felt inappropriate. But after I bought the building, I told myself I would find a reason to introduce myself properly. Blake paused. And then you told me about the stalker, and suddenly all I could think about was keeping you safe. My hero, Julia said softly, and she meant it. Blake turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face. Can I kiss you? I thought you would never ask. He kissed her there overlooking the city, slow and sweet and perfect. Julia's hands slid up his chest to loop around his neck, and Blake pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julia felt dizzy with happiness. Best first date ever, she whispered. Agreed. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other before Blake drove her home. He walked her to her door, kissed her again, and made her promise to text him when she was safely inside. I am already inside, Julia pointed out, her key in the lock. Humor me. She did, and his response came immediately, already counting the hours until I see you again. Julia fell asleep with her phone clutched to her chest, smiling like a teenager. The next few weeks felt like a dream. Blake and Julia fell into an easy rhythm, seeing each other almost every day. Sometimes they went out, to dinners or movies or walks through the sculpture park. Other times they stayed in, cooking together in Blake's incredible downtown loft apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and gourmet kitchen, or curled up on Julia's worn couch watching old movies while her roommate Sarah made herself scarce. The stalker, Derek, had not appeared since Julia started parking in the private garage. Blake's investigator learned that Derek had moved on to another city, picked up for questioning in a similar harassment case in Portland. The relief Julia felt was immense, though she realized with some surprise that part of her would miss the excuse to see Blake every evening. She need not have worried. Blake made it clear he wanted to see her all the time, stalker or not. Come with me to Portland next week, Blake said one evening as they cooked dinner in his loft. I have to check on a property renovation. We can make a long weekend of it. Julia hesitated, stirring the pasta sauce. I do not know if I can take the time off. When is the last time you took a vacation? I do not know. 2 years ago, then you are overdue. Ask Patricia. I have a feeling she will say yes. Blake was right. Patricia practically shoved Julia out the door when she asked, thrilled that the romance she had predicted was blossoming. So Julia packed a bag, and on a Friday morning in early November, she and Blake drove down to Portland in his car, talking and laughing the whole way. The weekend was magical. Blake's property was a historic building in the Pearl District that he was converting into a boutique hotel, and Julia was fascinated by the renovation process. The careful preservation of original features combined with modern amenities. They toured Powell's books, explored the Japanese garden, ate incredible food, and spent the evenings in a beautiful hotel suite overlooking the Willamette River. On their last night, lying in bed with Julia tucked against his side, Blake said, I am falling in love with you. Julia's breath caught. What? I know it is fast. I know we have only been officially dating for a few weeks. But Julia, I have never felt like this about anyone. You make me want things I never thought I wanted. A real relationship, someone to come home to. A future that is about more than just the next property deal. Blake propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know. Tears pricked Julia's eyes. I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first night you walked me to my car and acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Blake kissed her, tender and deep, and Julia felt the truth of their words settle into her bones. This was real. This was happening. This was hers. They returned to Seattle on Monday, and life continued in the best possible way. Julia met Blake's parents when they came to visit for Thanksgiving, a sweet couple who still lived in the small Oregon town where Blake grew up. His mother hugged Julia immediately and whispered, "I've never seen him this happy." And his father shook her hand and said, "Anyone who can make my son slow down long enough to enjoy life is all right by me." Julia introduced Blake to her parents over video chat, since traveling to Tacoma was complicated with their schedules. Her mother loved him instantly. Her father was more cautious, but by the end of the call, even he admitted that Blake seemed like a solid guy. Christmas came, and Blake surprised Julia with a trip to New York to see the exhibits at MoMA and the Met. They ice skated at Rockefeller Center, saw a Broadway show, and stayed at a hotel so fancy Julia felt out of place until Blake reminded her that she belonged anywhere she wanted to belong. "That is easy for you to say," Julia said as they sat in the hotel's rooftop bar, the Manhattan skyline glittering around them. "Why?" "Because you are confident and successful and comfortable anywhere." Blake took her hand. "Julia, I grew up in a town with more cows than people. My first apartment in Seattle had cockroaches and a radiator that barely worked. I had to learn confidence, had to build success from nothing. You think I was born comfortable in places like this? I was terrified the first time I stayed in a nice hotel, convinced everyone could tell I did not belong. But I learned that belonging is not about where you come from. It is about who you are and what you bring to the space you are in. And you, Julia Owens, bring beauty and intelligence and kindness wherever you go. You belong anywhere." Julia squeezed his hand, her heart so full it ached. "I love you." "I love you too." In January, Patricia announced she was retiring and selling the gallery. Julia was devastated until Blake sat her down and said, "Buy it." "Blake, I cannot afford. What if you had an investor? A silent partner who provides capital in exchange for a percentage of profits?" Julia stared at him. "You want to invest in the gallery. I want to invest in you. Julia, you could make Morrison Gallery into something incredible. You have the vision and the passion. Let me provide the means. That is a lot of money. It is an investment I believe in." They spent weeks working out the details with lawyers and accountants. Blake insisted on a fair contract that protected Julia's interests, gave her full creative control, and made clear that their business relationship was separate from their personal one. By March, the papers were signed, and Julia became the owner of Morrison Gallery with Blake as a silent partner. The first exhibit under Julia's full direction opened in April, showcasing women artists from the Pacific Northwest. It was a huge success, with record attendance and several pieces selling for impressive prices. Blake came to the opening night, beaming with pride, and Julia felt like she was floating. "You did this," Blake said as they stood in the crowded gallery. "This is all you. You helped. I wrote a check. You made the magic happen. Life was good. Better than good." Julia woke up every morning excited for the day, whether it involved working at the gallery she now owned, spending time with Blake, or both. They talked about moving in together, looked at apartments that would belong to both of them rather than just one or the other. They talked about the future in concrete terms, not vague some days but specific plans and timelines. In June, Blake asked Julia to move into his loft temporarily while they looked for their perfect place. Julia agreed, and Sarah threw her a goodbye party that turned into an engagement speculation session among her friends. "He is going to propose soon," Sarah predicted. "I can feel it." "We have only been together 8 months, Julia protested, but her heart fluttered at the thought. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Blake woke Julia up early and told her to dress casually. He drove them out of the city, taking winding roads that led into the mountains. Julia dozed off and on, trusting Blake completely. When she woke fully, they were parked near a trailhead. "Where are we?" Julia asked. "You will see. Come on." They hiked for 40 minutes, Blake leading the way along a trail that climbed steadily upward. Finally, they emerged at a clearing that overlooked a pristine alpine lake, the water so blue it looked unreal, mountains rising on all sides. "Blake, this is beautiful." "I used to come here when I was younger," Blake said, "when I needed to think, to figure things out. I made a lot of important decisions standing right here." Julia turned to him and her breath caught. Blake was down on one knee, a small velvet box in his hand. "Julia, the first time I saw you, I knew you were special. The first time I talked to you, I knew you were extraordinary. The first time I kissed you, I knew I wanted to do that for the rest of my life. You make me better. You make me happier. You make me believe that I can have a life beyond work, a real life full of love and laughter and art and all the things that matter. I want to build that life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to support your dreams and share your victories and be there for the hard days. I want everything, Julia. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Julia's face. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Blake slid the ring onto her finger, a simple but stunning diamond solitaire, and stood to pull her into his arms. They kissed there overlooking the lake, and Julia felt like the luckiest person alive. They married in September, a small ceremony in the sculpture park where Blake had first kissed her, surrounded by close friends and family. Julia wore a simple white dress, Blake wore a dark suit, and they wrote their own vows that made everyone cry. Patricia attended, beaming like a proud mother. Sarah was the maid of honor and gave a speech about how she knew from the start that Blake was different, that he looked at Julia like she was the sun. Blake's parents welcomed Julia into their family with open arms, and Julia's parents declared that they had never seen their daughter so happy. The reception was at a small restaurant, intimate and warm, exactly what Julia and Blake wanted for their honeymoon. They went to Italy for 2 weeks, touring art museums and historic sites, eating incredible food and simply enjoying being together. Blake joked that he spent most of the time in museums watching Julia look at art rather than looking at the art himself. "You are more interesting than the art," he said. "That is sacrilege." "I do not care. It is true." They returned to Seattle as husband and wife, moving into a beautiful apartment they had chosen together. A top-floor unit in one of Blake's buildings with huge windows and enough space for Julia to have a small studio for her own art projects. Blake insisted she take time to paint again, something she had given up years ago, and slowly Julia began to create again. The gallery thrived under her direction. Blake kept his promise to remain a silent partner, offering advice only when asked, letting Julia make all the creative decisions. But he came to every opening, always her proudest supporter, always the first to celebrate her successes. A year after their wedding, Julia discovered she was pregnant. Blake's reaction was pure joy, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, his face alight with happiness. They converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, painting it soft yellow and filling it with books and toys, and all the things a baby would need. Their daughter, Emma, was born in June, a perfect little girl with Blake's blue eyes and Julia's smile. Blake was an incredible father, patient and loving and completely devoted. He rearranged his work schedule to be home more, taught himself to change diapers and give bottles, and spent hours just holding Emma and talking to her about everything and nothing. Julia watched him with their daughter and fell even more in love, something she had not thought possible. This was her life now. This beautiful, unexpected, perfect life. 2 years later, they had a son, James, who had Julia's dark hair and Blake's determined personality. Their apartment filled with laughter and chaos and love. Blake scaled back his business even further, hiring a management team to handle day-to-day operations so he could focus on his family. Julia reduced her hours at the gallery, bringing in an assistant curator so she could spend more time with the children. They took family trips, visited grandparents, hosted holiday dinners. Blake never missed a school event or a doctor's appointment. Julia painted in the early mornings before the kids woke up, finding new inspiration in motherhood and love and the beautiful life they had built. On their 5th wedding anniversary, sitting on their balcony after the kids were asleep, Blake pulled Julia into his arms and said, "Do you remember that first night, when I walked you to your car?" "Of course. I knew then. I tried to tell myself I was just being helpful, just being a decent person, but I knew. I wanted a reason to see you every day. I wanted to be near you. I wanted this." He gestured around them at their home, their life. "All of it. I am glad you were stubborn. I am glad you let me be." Julia kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting the wine on his lips. "Best decision I ever made. Marrying me, letting you walk me to my car." Blake laughed, the sound rich and warm. "I would walk you anywhere, Julia, to the ends of the earth if you asked. Just to our bedroom is fine for tonight. Deal." They stood hand in hand and went inside to the life they had built together, the life that started with fear and a stalker and a parking lot, but became something beautiful and lasting and real. Julia had learned that sometimes the scariest moments led to the best things, that letting someone help you could be the strongest thing you could do, that love did not care about money or status or any of the arbitrary divides people created. Love just was. And theirs was the forever kind. Years continued to pass in a blur of happiness. Emma started school, showing an early interest in art that made Julia's heart swell. James turned out to be a builder like his father, always constructing elaborate towers and structures from blocks. The gallery continued to grow, gaining national recognition. Julia curated exhibits that drew visitors from across the country, building a reputation as someone who championed emerging artists and brought fresh voices to the art world. Blake's business remained successful, but he had learned to prioritize differently, to measure success not just in profits but in mornings spent making pancakes with his kids, in date nights with his wife, in the quiet moments of simply being present. They bought a house when Emma was 7 and James was 5, a beautiful craftsman in a neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets. It had a big backyard where the kids could play, a studio space for Julia, and a home office for Blake. They filled it with art and laughter and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake took Julia back to the Alpine lake where he had proposed. They hiked the trail hand in hand, talking about everything that had happened in the decades since that day, marveling at how much their lives had changed, how much they had grown together. "I would do it all again," Blake said as they stood overlooking the lake. "Every moment, every choice, all of it leads here to you, to us." "Even the scary parts at the beginning?" Julia asked. "Especially those. They brought you to me." Julia leaned into him, his arm solid around her shoulders. "I love our life. I love you. I love you too." They stood there as the sun set over the mountains, casting everything in gold and pink, two people who had found each other in the midst of fear and built something beautiful from it. Julia thought about that first night, about Derek the stalker, about being so afraid she could barely breathe. She thought about Blake showing up, this stranger who became everything, who saw her fear and met it with quiet strength. She thought about all the nights he walked her to her car without making it into a big production, without expecting gratitude or recognition, just doing it because it was the right thing to do, because she mattered. She thought about how that simple act of care had opened the door to everything else, to love and partnership and family, and a future neither of them could have imagined. Sometimes, Julia reflected, the best love stories started in parking lots with someone who just decided to show up. To be present, to care without fanfare or expectation. Blake had walked her to her car every night, and somehow, in doing so, he had walked straight into her heart and never left. They hiked back down as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, their hands intertwined, their future bright and certain. Tomorrow they would return to their kids, to the gallery, to the beautiful ordinary chaos of their life. But tonight they had this, just the two of them, the mountains, and the memory of where it all began. "Thank you," Julia said as they reached the car. "For what?" "For showing up. For every single time you showed up." Blake kissed her forehead. "Always, Julia, I will always show up for you." And he did. Every day for the rest of their lives, Blake Harrison showed up for Julia Owens Harrison, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with steady presence and unwavering love. He showed up for morning coffee and school pickups. He showed up for gallery openings and sick days. He showed up for celebrations and disappointments. He showed up when it was easy and when it was hard. That was the real love story, Julia realized. Not the beginning with its drama and fear and rescue, but the middle and the forever. The showing up day after day, year after year. The choosing each other every single morning. The building of a life that was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And it all started because one CEO decided to walk one scared woman to her car, quietly and without making it big, and in doing so, made it the biggest thing either of them had ever done.